The ballroom of Hartwell Manor blazed with the light of 1,000 candles. Chandeliers dripped crystal above a sea of silk and powder, above the laughter of people who had never once wondered where their next meal might come from. The orchestra played something warm and lilting, something designed to make everyone feel charmed by their own reflection. Footmen moved like ghosts through the crowd, pouring wine no one was counting, and the air smelled of hothouse roses and money. But there was one woman in that room who was not part of the celebration. She stood behind the widest marble column on the western wall, pressed against it, as though the stone itself might absorb her, as though she could simply stop existing if she went still enough. She wore a deep red gown, clean, modest, the kind a woman wears when she has very little, but refuses to own that quietly. Her dark hair was pinned simply, a few curls loose at her neck. Around her throat, a single ruby pendant caught the candlelight. Her name was Evangeline Crest. She was 23 years old. She was a governess. She was crying. Not the delicate kind of crying that society women performed in drawing rooms. This was something raw and silent, the kind that comes when a person has held themselves together for as long as their body allows and simply cannot do it anymore. She pressed her fingers to her lips to keep the sound in. Her eyes were fixed on the grand staircase across the hall. On those stairs, descending in slow, deliberate steps, was Duke Alaric Vane. He wore a dark navy evening coat with velvet lapels, a perfectly white cravat, gloves so immaculate they looked ceremonial. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and he moved through the world the way men do when the world has never once said no to them. His jaw was set, his dark eyes forward, his expression that particular kind of cool disinterest that only extraordinary wealth can manufacture. On his arm was a woman in white. Her gown was silk and lace, and probably worth more than a governess earned in 5 years. She was pale and fair, and delicate-looking, with pearl earrings and a smile she aimed outward like a weapon. Her name was Alara Finch, soon to be Alara Vane, Duchess of Hartwell, a title she had been maneuvering toward for the better part of 2 years. And Evangeline watched them descend that staircase together, and she pressed her hand harder over her mouth, and she stayed hidden behind her column, because she had something to tell him, something she had been trying to tell him for 3 weeks, something he was about to make impossible to say. Here is what you need to understand about the night everything broke open. It was not a dramatic night, in the way stories usually arrange them. There was no thunder, no omen, no convenient sign from the heavens. The music played on. The footmen poured wine. The guests laughed at things that were not funny, because that is what guests do at parties when powerful men are in the room. Evangeline stepped out from behind the column. She smoothed her red dress with both hands. She touched the ruby at her throat once, briefly, the way a person touches something that belonged to someone they loved and lost, and she walked toward the staircase. She was shaking, not from fear, exactly, or not only from fear. She was shaking because she was carrying 2 lives inside her body, and she had been doing it alone for 11 weeks, and she was exhausted in the way that goes all the way down to the center of a person and does not leave room for anything else. She reached the foot of the stairs, just as Alaric and Alara reached the bottom. She said his name. He looked at her, and in that look, brief, cold, sweeping, dismissive, she understood everything she had spent 11 weeks refusing to understand. If this story already has you at the edge of your seat, subscribe right now, because what Evangeline does next, and what she becomes, will change the way you see power, patience, and survival forever. The hall went quiet, in the specific way halls go quiet, when something is about to happen that everyone will pretend not to have witnessed. Alara's grip tightened on Alaric's arm, just slightly, just enough for him to feel it. He stopped walking. Evangeline stood at the foot of the staircase in her modest red dress, and she looked up at him, and she said the words she had been rehearsing for 3 weeks. Evangeline, Your Grace, I need to speak with you. It is a matter of considerable urgency. Alaric looked at her the way a man looks at a smudge on a clean window, not with anger, Not even with recognition, really. Just with the mild irritation of something appearing where it should not be. She noticed he did not use her name. She noticed the way his eyes moved past her face, checking the room, calculating the audience. Alaric, Miss Crest, this is neither the time nor the appropriate setting for whatever concern you may have. Speak to the housekeeper. Evangeline, I cannot speak to the housekeeper. What I have to tell you is not a matter for the housekeeper. It is a matter for you. Only you. A few guests nearby had slowed their conversations. Ilara's smile did not move, but her eyes sharpened. Evangeline felt it. Then the humiliation began to gather at the edges of her, like weather coming in. But she had not crossed that hall and stepped out from behind that column to stop now. She had 2 lives inside her that were not yet large enough to be afraid. Evangeline, Your Grace, I am carrying your children, twins. A physician confirmed it last week. I am nearly 3 months along. Silence. Then Ilara laughed. It was a small, musical, perfectly calibrated sound. Alaric, I beg your pardon? His voice was very quiet, very controlled. That was the thing about Alaric Vane. He never raised his voice in public. He did not need to. The quiet was its own kind of cruelty. Alaric, you are making a claim. In my own hall, on the night of my engagement, in front of my guests. Evangeline, I am telling you the truth. Alaric, you are a governess. You are in my employ. And whatever you believe you are doing right now, I assure you, it will not end well for you. She should have stopped. Any reasonable person would have stopped. But there are moments when a person has been made so small for so long that they simply run out of the instinct that tells them to make themselves smaller. Evangeline, you know it is true. You know what passed between us. I am not asking for your title or your name. I am asking you to acknowledge that these children exist, and that they are yours, and that they deserve. Alaric, they are not mine. 3 words, flat, final, said without flinching. Around them, the room had gone almost completely still. The orchestra had moved into a quieter passage. Every face in the hall was arranged in expressions of careful, not looking while absolutely looking. Alaric, I do not know what arrangement you had imagined for yourself here, but I will be direct with you, since directness appears to be the only language you understand. You are employed as a governess, nothing more. What you are suggesting is a fabrication designed by a desperate woman who has misread a situation and who now hopes to leverage it for personal advancement. It is not only false, it is beneath contempt. Evangeline felt her face go cold. Later, she would think, that was when she stopped being Evangeline. That sentence, that particular arrangement of words, she did not feel it at the time. Shock is a mercy like that. But later, she would trace everything back to that sentence. Alaric, you will leave this estate tonight. You will not return. Any personal effects you have left in the household will be forwarded to whatever address you provide to the porter. You have 30 minutes. He looked at her for one more moment, just long enough for her to understand that it was not contempt in his eyes. It was nothing. She was nothing to him. A disruption to be resolved. Then he turned and led Ilara toward the center of the hall, and the orchestra came up again, and the guests rearranged themselves, and the party resumed. And Evangeline stood alone at the foot of the staircase. The night was cold. November in London has a particular cruelty to it, not the dramatic cruelty of a storm, but the slow, damp, bone-settling kind that makes a person feel they have been forgotten by the sun entirely. Evangeline walked out through the servants' gate, because the main gate had already been locked against her. She had her red dress, her coat, a small purse with 4 shillings and 8 pence, and the ruby pendant at her throat. That was everything. She stood in the lane behind Hartwell Manor and looked up at the windows, all that warm gold light spilling out into the dark, and she could hear, very faintly, the sound of music. She placed one hand on her stomach, flat still, nothing visible, but she could feel them, or she told herself she could, which amounts to the same thing. 2 small presences, somewhere below her heart, growing in the dark in total ignorance of what had just been done to them. She stood there for a long time. Then she made a vow, not out loud, not with tears. The crying was over. She made it silently, the way serious decisions are made, not in the heat of feeling, but in the ash left after feeling has burned through. I will not spend one more night mourning what this man took from me. I will take it back. I will take back everything, and when I am finished, he will understand what it means to stand in a room and be made into nothing. She put one foot in front of the other. She walked out into the dark, and she did not look back at the house even once. There is a kind of moral lesson that comes quietly, without announcing itself, that the cruelest thing one person can do to another is not to hate them, but to look at them and see nothing. Alaric Vane did not despise Evangeline Crest that night. He simply erased her. And of all the things a person can survive, erasure is the one that either destroys you or builds something in you that cannot be destroyed. Evangeline was about to find out which kind she was. 8 years is long enough to become a different person entirely. It is long enough to learn 4 languages, to master the shipping routes between Southampton and Bombay, to understand how debt works not as the debtor, but as the creditor, which is a profoundly different education. It is long enough to fail badly at least twice, and come back from each failure with something sharper than what you had before. 8 years after walking out of that lane behind Hartwell Manor with 4 shillings and 8pence, Evangeline Crest no longer existed. In her place was a woman from the trading houses of Calcutta called Madame Morwenna. In her place was a woman from the banks of Amsterdam called Viper. In her place was a woman who owned 7 merchant vessels, 3 warehouses on the London Docklands, debt notes on a number of English aristocratic estates whose holders had borrowed against them in moments of private desperation, and who was, at this particular moment, sitting in a high-backed chair in a lamplit office in Calcutta, reading a ledger with the same focused calm that other women brought to needlework. The beginning had been brutal in the way that beginnings sometimes are when a person has no other choice but to begin. Evangeline had reached Portsmouth 3 days after leaving London, having walked and hitched rides on hay carts and slept one night in a stable. She had exactly one valuable thing in the world, the ruby pendant her grandmother had left her, which she wore at her throat even then. She did not sell it. She pawned it enough to book passage on a merchant ship to Lisbon as a kitchen hand, because kitchen hands were the only passengers who did not need references. It was on that ship, somewhere in the Bay of Biscay, that the twins were born, a month early, helped into the world by the cook's wife, who had delivered 7 of her own children on land and treated the whole affair with a cheerful practicality that Evangeline would be grateful for the rest of her life. 2 children, a girl and a boy, both small, both furious, both alive. She called the girl Iris. She had not yet decided on a name for the boy when the fire started. It was a small fire, as ship fires go. It began in the cargo hold and was mostly contained within an hour. But in that hour, in the confusion and the smoke and the screaming, Evangeline was separated from one of her infants. The boy was gone. They searched the ship. They searched the debris. They found nothing. The cook's wife told her later, gently, that small infants do not survive fires on ships. She said it the way kind people say hard things, slowly, with her hand over Evangeline's. She said it was a mercy, in a way, that the smoke came first. Evangeline did not believe her. She could not have explained why then. She simply felt, somewhere below rational thought, that her son was not dead. She had carried 2 lives inside her body for 9 months. She would have known if one of them had simply stopped. She kept that feeling to herself. She got off the ship in Lisbon with Iris in her arms and the ruby pendant back at her throat, and she began. The first year was about survival, which is unglamorous work. She found a position in Lisbon translating correspondence for a Portuguese wool merchant, because she had learned French from a tutor as a child, and Portuguese, as it turned out, yielded quickly to a person who was sufficiently motivated. She carried Iris everywhere, in a cloth sling, and wrote letters at night after the baby slept. And she watched, very carefully, how the merchant handled his accounts. And she began to understand the difference between the surface of trade and the machinery beneath it. The second year was about leverage. She had learned something important, that merchants borrowed from each other constantly, informally, and that the informal debts were the ones that caused the most distress, because they were unwritten and therefore difficult to dispute or discharge. She also learned that the people holding those informal debts were often willing to sell them for fractions of their value to anyone who could pay in ready coin, because uncertainty is expensive. She began buying informal debts, small ones at first. A tailor owned by a vineyard owner, a jeweler owned by a sugar merchant. She bought them cheap and collected them at full value, and she was always scrupulously fair about it. She never destroyed anyone unnecessarily, and she reinvested every margin. By the third year, she had enough to do something larger. By the sixth year, she had shipping interests in 3 countries. By the seventh, she had offices in Calcutta and Amsterdam, and a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered. People who had never met her knew her by the name Viper, and they used it respectfully, which is the only way you want a name like that to be used. Iris grew up alongside all of it. She was 8 years old now, and she had her mother's dark hair, and her mother's stillness, and a mind that moved through information, the way water moves through small spaces, finding every opening, never forcing, always eventually through. Morwenna had not hidden from her daughter what their life had cost. She had simply made sure that Iris understood it as information rather than as grief. Morwenna, we are building something, not for its own sake, for a purpose. When you are old enough, I will tell you the whole of it. Until then, I need you to be the sharpest person in any room you enter. Iris, I am already the sharpest person in any room I enter. Morwenna had looked at her daughter and felt something complicated move through her. Pride, partly, but also a very specific ache, because the boy should have been sitting across from Iris right now, matching her sentence for sentence. The boy should have had a name by now. She put the thought away. There was work to do. In the 8th year, a letter arrived from a solicitor in London. It was addressed to Madame Morwenna, care of her Calcutta office, and it concerned the status of a debt she had purchased 18 months earlier. A debt originally held against the Hartwell estate. The Hartwell estate. She read the letter twice, very carefully. Then she set it down on her desk, and she looked out the window at the harbour, and she was quiet for a long time. She had not bought that debt by accident. She had bought it knowing exactly what it was. She had been patient for 8 years, and she had moved carefully, and she had built something that could not be shaken. And now London was ready for her, or more precisely, she was ready for London. She called her assistant, Morwenna. Begin preparing the London office. I want the Belgrave house open and staffed by the end of November. I will travel in December. Assistant, shall I send ahead? Some of the estate families will want to know who is coming. Morwenna smiled. It was a very particular smile. Not warm, not cold, but precise. The smile of a woman who had spent 8 years building something for this exact moment. Morwenna. Let them wonder. London in December was the same as London had always been. Cold, grey, self-important, and entirely convinced that the rest of the world existed as a backdrop to its own drama. Morwenna arrived on a Tuesday morning in a carriage that had been built for her in Vienna and that no one in London had seen before. Black lacquer, gold trim, 2 footmen, 4 matched grey horses, and luggage that took 3 separate conveyances to carry. She rode with Iris beside her and did not look out the window at the city, because she had made a decision, years ago, not to feel nostalgic about England. Nostalgia was a luxury she could not afford. Nostalgia meant looking backward. She was here to finish something. The house in Belgrave Square was fully staffed and perfectly appointed. Her London solicitor, a sharp, meticulous man named Mr. Aldridge, who had been managing her English interests for 4 years without ever meeting her in person, was waiting in the entrance hall when she arrived. "Aldridge, Madam Morwenna, welcome to London. I trust the journey was tolerable." Morwenna: "The journey was fine. Tell me what I need to know about the season's social calendar." He handed her a list. She looked at it on her feet in the entrance hall, still in her traveling coat, while footmen moved luggage around her. "Morwenna, the Pemberton Winter Ball. Is Hartwell invited?" "Aldridge, the Duke of Hartwell is always invited to the Pemberton Ball, Madame. He is one of their oldest family connections." Morwenna: "Then I need an invitation too. Get one." Aldridge: "Lady Pemberton has already been made aware of your arrival in London. She has been asking about you for 2 weeks. I expect an invitation will arrive before Thursday." It arrived on Wednesday. The whispers began that same week. London society operates on information the way other economies operate on currency, and the arrival of Madame Morwenna, mysterious, wealthy, foreign in some unplaceable way that no one could quite specify, was the kind of information that spread very quickly through the particular channels that served that purpose. They said she owned ships. They said she owned debts. They said the trading houses of 3 continents competed for her favor, and almost none of them won it. They said she had appeared in Amsterdam one winter, as if from nowhere, with a young daughter and a lawyer who made people nervous in professional ways, and that she had transformed a modest buying position into one of the largest private trade operations on the continent in the space of 6 years. They said her name was Morwenna, and that somewhere she had acquired the title Viper, and that she wore it with the comfortable indifference of someone who has been called worse and survived it. They said she was beautiful, in the way that certain dangerous things are beautiful, precisely, deliberately, and with an edge. Iris heard the whispers too, because Iris heard everything. She was 8 years old, and she had her mother's gift for going unnoticed when she chose to, and she moved through the servants' quarters and the outer rooms of the Belgrave house, and came back to her mother each evening with small pieces of intelligence arranged in careful order. Iris: "They say the Duke of Hartwell has been borrowing heavily. 2 of his estates are leveraged. His wife is unwell. No one specifies what kind of unwell. And they have a son. His name is Oliver. He is 9 years old." Morwenna had gone very still. A son, 9 years old, born the same year Iris was born, the same year the fire happened on the ship off Lisbon. She filed that information in the part of her mind that was not yet ready to look at it directly. Morwenna: "What does the boy look like?" Iris: "I don't know yet. I haven't seen him." Morwenna: "Find out." She said it quietly, almost gently, but her hands, resting flat on the desk in front of her, had pressed down hard into the surface. The Pemberton Winter Ball was everything a ball of its kind was supposed to be. Too many candles, too much perfume, and exactly the right number of people who desperately wanted to be seen by exactly the right other people. Madame Morwenna arrived at 9 o'clock, which was late enough to be noticed without being theatrical about it. She wore deep burgundy, not the modest red of a governess, but something architectural, deliberate, the color of old wine and ambition. The gown was silk, the cut was precise, and the ruby pendant at her throat was the same one she had worn on the night she was thrown out of Hartwell Manor. She had reclaimed it from the Lisbon pawnbroker on her way back through 3 years later. She had paid 3 times what she pawned it for, and she had considered it money perfectly spent. She walked into the Pemberton ballroom, and every conversation in her immediate vicinity took a brief, involuntary pause. She did not smile. She did not look around. She moved through the room with the unhurried certainty of someone who has already calculated every angle and found them satisfactory. This, she had learned, was more effective than any social performance. People are most unsettled by those who appear to need nothing from them. Lady Pemberton received her with considerable warmth and considerable curiosity, because Lady Pemberton was clever enough to know that these were the same thing. Lady Pemberton: "Madame Morwenna, you are precisely as extraordinary as everyone has been saying. I am so glad you have come to London." Morwenna: London is a city worth returning to, particularly this winter. The Duke of Hartwell arrived at 9:30. He was 40 now, and the years had treated him the way years treat men who have always been handsome and know it. Finely, the dark hair had a thread of silver at the temples. The jaw was as set as ever, the posture immaculate, the dark navy coat precisely the kind of thing a man wears when he wants to suggest he gives no thought to what he wears. On his arm was his Duchess, Ilara, in pale pink, softer than the white she'd worn 9 years ago, as though the years had muted her slightly. She was still beautiful, but her eyes moved differently than they used to. They checked the room in small, quick sweeps, the way eyes do when their owner is waiting for something to go wrong. Behind them, attending with the Pemberton children, was the boy, Oliver Vane, 9 years old. He was slight, dark-haired, with wide, dark eyes and an expression of serious, thoughtful attention that was entirely at odds with the surrounding chaos of an adult party. He was watching the chandelier with the focused contemplation of someone working out a structural problem. He looked exactly like Iris. Not similar, not like a family resemblance might look from a distance. Exactly like her. The same jaw, the same set of the eyes, the same particular stillness. Morwenna understood what she was seeing. She had understood it from the moment Iris told her about the boy. She had simply not permitted herself to understand it fully until she saw his face. Her son was alive. Her son was alive, and he was standing 30 feet away from her in a borrowed ballroom, and he did not know her, and she did not know yet what had been done. She breathed. She arranged her face into its most pleasant, most interesting expression, and she waited. The introduction came an hour later, engineered by Lady Pemberton, with the cheerful efficiency of a woman who considers social matchmaking a civic duty. Lady Pemberton. Duke Vane, you absolutely must meet Madame Morwenna. She has just arrived from the continent, and she is completely fascinating. Madame His Grace the Duke of Hartwell. Alaric looked at her. Something moved across his face, a flicker, quickly controlled. He was looking at her the way people look at something that reminds them of something they cannot quite place. Alaric, Madame Morwenna, I believe I have been hearing your name for several weeks now. Morwenna, I would imagine so. I have several interests in London that require some attention. Alaric, trading interests, I understand. Shipping. Morwenna, among other things. His eyes stayed on her a moment longer than courtesy required. She held his gaze with the calm of someone who has rehearsed this moment for 8 years and is therefore not particularly impressed by it. Alaric, you look familiar to me. Have we met before? Perhaps in Paris? Morwenna, I have spent very little time in Paris, but I am told I have a common face. She watched him decide to accept this. She watched him choose convenience over instinct, which is what people do when the instinct is saying something they do not want to hear. Ilara appeared on his shoulder. She looked at Morwenna, and unlike her husband, she did not look at Morwenna as though she almost recognized her. She looked at Morwenna with the specific, immediate hostility of someone who recognizes a threat before they can explain why. Ilara, how charming to meet you. Alaric tells me you are newly arrived from the continent. Morwenna, only just. London is as beautiful as I remembered. A beat of silence. Ilara, as you remembered? Morwenna, did I say that? Forgive me. I meant as I had imagined. One hears so much about London abroad. She smiled. She moved on. Behind her, she felt Ilara's eyes follow her across the room. Good. Let her look. Let her try to place it. The recognition would come eventually, and by then, Morwenna would have already taken everything. The month of January passed like a chess game, played by one person who had studied every possible move in advance, against another who believed they were playing a different game entirely. Morwenna moved methodically. She had been moving methodically for 8 years. She did not hurry now. The first thing she did was make herself indispensable to London's social infrastructure. She hosted a dinner, then another, then a musical. The Belgrave House was beautiful. The food was extraordinary. The guest lists were curated with the precision of someone who understood that the right 12 people in a room together are worth more than any advertisement. She invited the right editors and the right merchants and the right ladies whose opinions carried weight in the rooms she needed to enter next. She did not invite the Duke of Hartwell to any of these events. This was deliberate. Exclusion is a more powerful signal than inclusion. The second thing she did was begin calling in debts. Not all of them, not yet. She was surgical about it, the way a very good physician is surgically working towards something specific, removing only what needs to be removed, leaving everything else intact. She began with the gambling debts. Alaric Vane had borrowed, over the course of 3 years, a sum of money from 3 different private lenders to cover losses at cards. None of these lenders knew the others. None of them knew that all 3 notes now belonged to Madame Morwenna. She had acquired them quietly, through intermediaries, over 18 months. She sent a polite letter to Alaric's solicitor in the 2nd week of January. It was brief and professional, and indicated that the 3 notes had been consolidated and that she would appreciate a meeting, at his earliest convenience, to discuss repayment terms. The meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon. Alaric came himself, which told her something, that the amount was significant enough that he did not want his solicitor handling the conversation. Alaric, I was surprised to learn these notes had changed hands. Morwenna, debt has a way of moving. I hope the consolidation is not inconvenient. Alaric, it is not inconvenient. I simply prefer to know who holds my paper. As a matter of principle. Morwenna, a sensible principle. You know now. Shall we discuss terms? He studied her. She felt him trying, again, to place her face, and she watched him dismiss it, again. Alaric, you have not been in London society long. How did you come to acquire these notes? Morwenna, I have been building interests in England for several years from abroad. The opportunity presented itself, and I have never been in the habit of passing on sound investments. Alaric, I see. And what exactly do you consider sound repayment terms? Morwenna, I am patient, Your Grace. We can arrange something comfortable. Time is not my concern. He left the meeting, believing he had handled it well, she could tell. He was that kind of man. The kind who walked away from a controlled conversation, feeling in control. She let him have it. She had time. The ancestral forest came next. Alaric's grandfather had borrowed against the Hartwell forest 3,000 acres of old-growth timber in Kent, using a long-term private arrangement that had been rolling over for decades. The current creditor was an elderly man in Bristol who had been trying to extricate himself from the debt without triggering a public dispute with a duke for the better part of 5 years. Morwenna made him an offer that solved his problem entirely. She owned the forest by the end of February. It was also in February that Iris came to her one evening with something on her face that was not her usual expression. Usually Iris wore the look of someone collecting information, patient, receptive, interested. That evening, she wore something different, something careful. Iris, I found out something about Oliver, the Hartwell boy. Morwenna set down her pen. Iris, I was at the Pendleton Children's afternoon. He was there. He didn't know I was watching him. Morwenna, what did you find out? Iris paused, and this was unusual enough that Morwenna's attention sharpened completely. Iris, he has a pendant, a small one, on a chain under his shirt. I saw it when he bent to pick something up. It is a ruby, small, old-fashioned, just like yours. The room was very quiet. Morwenna, Iris, are you certain? Iris, I am always certain. Morwenna turned to look out the window. Her hand went to her own pendant, the one she had worn every day for 9 years, and she held it between her fingers, and she thought about a ship on fire and a cook's wife saying it was a mercy, and the feeling she had carried ever since that could not be true. She had given both twins matching pendants, small ones, made from a fragment of the larger stone, because the larger stone was all she had left of her family, and she had wanted to give them something of themselves. She had made them on the ship, in the weeks before the birth, while her hands still had enough steadiness for delicate work. She was very still for a long time, Then she picked up her pen. Morwenna. Good. Keep watching him. But Iris does not get close to him. Not yet. Iris. Why? Morwenna. Because if I am right about what that pendant means, we need to know everything about how he came to have it, before we do anything else. And I need to be right before we move. Not almost right. Completely right. March brought rain, and with the rain, Morwenna began the third stage of her plan, which was considerably less financial and considerably more personal. She began the haunting. It was Iris who had suggested it, actually, with the lateral thinking of a child, raised in the company of strategy. Iris, you said the Duchess is already nervous. What makes nervous people more nervous? Morwenna. Uncertainty. Iris. Right. And what specifically makes guilty people nervous? Morwenna. The thing they are guilty of. Morwenna had looked at her daughter with a feeling she sometimes had trouble naming. The pure, slightly alarming pride of watching someone become exactly what she had hoped, and slightly more than she had intended. The rumor began in the servants' quarters of 3 adjacent households spread by 3 different people who did not know each other, and who had each received a small sum of money in exchange for a single story, told once, casually, at the right moment. The story was this: that the staff at Hartwell Manor had been seeing something, a woman, in the east corridor, near the Grand Hall, wearing a dark red dress, seen only from a distance, always near the large marble column on the western wall, gone when you look directly. It was, of course, nonsense. But nonsense delivered correctly is indistinguishable from truth, and within a fortnight, the rumor had reached the Duchess Alara through no fewer than 4 separate channels. Alara's health had not been robust for years. Her personal physician visited twice weekly. She had episodes. He called them episodes of anxiety, of sleeplessness, of a consuming and inexplicable certainty that something was coming for her. He prescribed rest and chamomile tinctures and a quieter social calendar. The ghost story made things considerably worse. Alaric came to Morwenna about the forest in mid-March. He arrived at the Belgrave house unannounced, which told her he was rattled enough to have abandoned the protocol he normally maintained with care. Alaric. The Hartwell forest has been in my family for 140 years. Morwenna. I am aware. I read the title history quite thoroughly before completing the purchase. Alaric. I would like to discuss buying it back. Morwenna. I am certain you would. Alaric. Name your price. Morwenna. It is not for sale. Not yet, at any rate. He stared at her. Alaric. Not yet. What does that mean? Morwenna. It means that I have plans for the timber that I am still developing. When those plans mature, if the situation changes, I will let you know. He was trying to read her. She could feel him turning her over in his mind, the way a man turns over a document he suspects of containing a hidden clause. The recognition was still there, hovering at the edge of his awareness. She could see it, the way you can see a word someone almost has on the tip of their tongue. Let him almost have it. Almost exactly where she wanted him. Alaric, you are not what you appear to be. Morwenna, most interesting people aren't. Alaric, I mean that specifically, not as a compliment. Morwenna, I understand you, and I mean my answer specifically, not as a deflection. He left. He did not get the forest back, but she watched him go, and she recognized something in his walk that had not been there at the Pemberton ball. Wait. He was carrying something now. A low, unspecific dread. Good, she thought. Now you know what it is to feel what I felt. Standing in that lane. Cold. November. With everything gone. It was in this same week that Iris came back from an afternoon excursion, with something in her face that Morwenna had not seen before. It looked, improbably, like affection. Iris. Oliver was at the same lending library as me today. We read at adjacent tables for almost an hour. Morwenna. You said you would not get close to him. Iris. I did not get close to him. We simply occupied the same room. The adjacent tables are not close. Morwenna. Iris. Iris. He is reading 3 books simultaneously, and he keeps precise notes in the margins. and he is extraordinarily rude to anyone who speaks to him when he is concentrating. I find him interesting." Morwenna was quiet for a moment. She looked at her daughter's face, and she felt something shift in her, something that was not part of the plan. Her children had been together in the same room, separated for 9 years by fire and cruelty and chance, and they had sat at adjacent library tables and read in companionable silence, and neither of them had known. "Morwenna, come here." She pulled Iris into her arms, something she did not do often anymore, because Iris was 8 and considered herself largely past it. "Morwenna, you are the best thing I have ever done. I need you to know that." "Iris, I know that. You tell me frequently." "Morwenna, good. Keep going to the library." April was when Morwenna moved on the estate itself. The Hartwell estate, the house, the grounds, the buildings, the name carved into the stone above the gate, had been encumbered under a private bond that dated to Alaric's father's time. The bond had been held by a family in Edinburgh who had not wanted to press it for reasons of social delicacy and who had been quietly waiting for it to resolve itself through normal financial means. It had not resolved itself. Alaric had been paying interest on the interest for 11 years. The Edinburgh family received an extremely generous offer from a discreet intermediary in March. They accepted by the end of the month. Morwenna held the bond on Hartwell Manor on the first day of April. She did not send notice immediately. She waited 3 weeks, and she spent those 3 weeks making sure everything else was in order. The gambling debts, the forest, the shipping interests she had quietly positioned to make his routes unworkable without her cooperation. She wanted the notice to land on something that had already been weakened, so that the weight of it would be precisely sufficient. The notice of debt consolidation arrived at Hartwell Manor on the anniversary. She had calculated the date specifically, 22nd of April, 9 years to the day from the night she had been turned out of that house. She knew it had arrived because Aldridge sent a brief note that afternoon. Delivered as instructed. Effect immediately. She sat in the Belgrave drawing room with a glass of water and felt nothing in particular, which was interesting. She had expected some satisfaction, perhaps, or relief, or the completion of something that had been pending for a very long time. What she felt instead was focused, steady, like a person who has been climbing for a very long time and can finally see where the path levels out. Iris came in that evening with the medical files. She had been working toward this for 6 weeks, moving through the Hartwell household's outer edges with the patient, systematic attention of someone who understood that the most useful information is never in the obvious places. She had cultivated a friendship with the kitchen maid's younger sister, who had access to the upper floors on Thursdays when the physician visited. She had asked very specific questions about very specific documents over a period of weeks. The files she brought to Morwenna were not original. They were careful copies, made in the physician's own hand, when he prepared summaries for the Duchess's secondary physician in Bath. Iris had borrowed them for 4 hours and returned them without anyone noticing. Morwenna read them. She read them twice. Then she sat very still for a long time. The documents were medical records from the year of Oliver's birth. They included the primary physician's notes, a consultation with a specialist in Edinburgh, and the original delivery record. Alaric Vane had never given birth. The delivery record had been amended, not cleverly, not with any particular skill, but with the confidence of someone who had expected it never to be examined, and beneath the amendment, the original notation was still legible, under certain light. Duchess, confined and treated. No viable outcome. Period of recovery, recommended. There had been no birth. There had been a child introduced into the household through other means. A child 9 years old, found on a ship, perhaps, or purchased from someone who had found him. A child with dark hair and a ruby pendant, and the particular stillness of a person who had been placed somewhere they did not understand, and made the best of it. Her son. Her son was alive, and Ilara had known. Ilara had known for 9 years, and she had told no one, and she had raised him as her own, and she had watched Morwenna be thrown out of Hartwell Manor, and had said nothing. Worse, the fire on the ship, the accident. Someone had known Evangeline had twins. Someone had known exactly what ship she was on, and had arranged for one of them to be taken. And the only person with both the information and the motive was the woman who had been standing on those stairs in white, watching, while Alaric threw her out. Morwenna stood up. She walked to the window. She pressed her forehead against the glass. I have spent 8 years planning to take everything from Alaric Vane, and he may not have known. He may have been as deceived as I was, and the person who actually did this, the person who took my son, is upstairs in Hartwell Manor right now, watching the walls close in, and she is going to do something desperate. She turned around. Morwenna. Iris. Does Oliver have a nurse, a personal attendant who stays close to him? Iris. A tutor, and a footman who doubles as a guard when the Duchess is anxious. Morwenna. How close is the guard? Iris. Very. Morwenna. We need to move faster. Alaric came to her 3 days after the notice arrived. He came alone this time. No carriage, no footman, arriving at the Belgrave house on foot in the early evening, which was the kind of detail that told you everything you needed to know about the state he was in. She received him in the drawing room and did not offer him a seat immediately, because every small thing matters when the structure of power between two people is shifting. Alaric, you hold everything. Morwenna, yes. Alaric, the gambling debts, the forest, and now the house itself. Morwenna, yes. Alaric, this is not a coincidence. This is a campaign. You have been conducting a campaign against my estate for at least 2 years. Morwenna, at least. He was very controlled. She gave him that. He was extraordinarily controlled, even now. Even standing in someone else's drawing room, knowing that the house his family had occupied for 150 years was currently owned by the woman across from him. Alaric, why? One word, but not a cold word. For the first time, she heard something roar in it. Morwenna, you do not recognize me. Alaric, I have told you. You remind me of someone. I cannot. Morwenna, my name is not Morwenna. That is a name I chose when I had to choose something new. My name is Evangeline Crest. You employed me as a governess at Hartwell Manor for 14 months. On the night of your engagement to Elara Finch, I came to you and told you I was carrying your children, and you called me a fabrication, and you threw me out. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. He stared at her. She watched the recognition come up through him slowly, like light through deep water. The face he had not been able to place for 4 months, finally settling into its true shape. She saw the moment he saw it. She saw what it cost him. Alaric, Evangeline. He said it very quietly, not as a greeting, as something else entirely. Morwenna. Yes, Alaric. The children. Morwenna. I had them. Twins. A girl and a boy. Something happened to his face then. Something she had not prepared for. Because she had expected, when this moment came, to feel very clean and very cold and entirely satisfied. She had not expected his face to look like that, as though something inside him had just broken quietly and completely. Alaric, Evangeline, what I did that night, how I spoke to you, I have to tell you. Morwenna, do not yet. I need to tell you something first, and you need to hear it without interrupting, because what I am about to say is more important than anything else. She sat down. She placed her hands flat on her knees. She told him about the fire on the ship, about the boy she lost, about Iris, about the pendant. She told him about the medical files. She watched him understand. She watched Alaric Vane, a man she had spent 8 years building toward destroying, understand that his wife had taken a child, and that the child was not hers, and that the woman he had thrown out into the cold had come back not merely to ruin him, but to retrieve what had been stolen. She had prepared for many reactions. She had not quite prepared for the way he looked when he understood all of it at once. It was not the look of a guilty man defending himself. It was the look of someone who has just realized that the destruction around them is not entirely what they believed it to be. Alaric? I did not know about any of this. Morwenna. I know. Alaric. I believed when I said those things to you that night. I believed Ilara had told me things. About you. About your character. About what she said you had said to other men in the household. I believed her. Morwenna. You chose to believe her. Alaric. Yes, I did. And that choice was wrong. It was a wrong. I cannot. Morwenna. Alaric. Stop. We do not have time for this right now. Your wife knows something is happening. She has been unraveling for months, and she is not a foolish woman. And when cornered, a person who has done what she has done becomes dangerous, especially to the thing they have used to secure their position. He understood immediately. Alaric, Oliver, Morwenna, I need you to take me to him, tonight. They were reaching for their coats when his footman arrived. Breathless, Alaric's face went white before the man had finished his sentence. There was smoke coming from the east wing of Hartwell Manor. The carriage covered the distance to Hartwell Manor in less than 20 minutes, which was faster than it should have been possible to go through London streets in the evening. But Alaric's driver was desperate, and Morwenna was in the carriage beside him saying nothing at all, which was more frightening than anything she could have said. She was thinking about fire, about the smell of smoke on a ship in the Bay of Biscay, about a cook's wife saying it was a mercy, about 9 years of carrying a grief that she had refused to confirm because her body knew the truth before her mind would accept it. Hartwell Manor's east wing was producing a thick column of smoke from an upper window. The household staff was in various stages of alarm in the front drive. 2 footmen had already organized a chain with buckets from the courtyard well. Alaric was out of the carriage before it stopped moving. Morwenna was directly behind him. She had studied the floor plan of this house. She had done it 2 months ago, obtaining an old architectural survey through a property agent, because she had known this night would come in some form, and she believed in being prepared for the thing you hope will not happen. The grand hall was exactly as it had been 9 years ago. The chandeliers, the staircase, the marble columns along the western wall. She registered all of it in the second it took to cross the threshold, and she registered something else. The column, the one she had stood behind, the one she had hidden behind in her red dress while she cried. She went up the staircase at speed. The smoke was coming from the east corridor, the family wing, and the private rooms. She went toward it, against the instinct that tells every person to go the other way. She found Iris first. This was not a surprise. Iris had been here already, had arrived ahead of the carriage through means of her own devising that Morwenna chose not to examine too closely, and she was standing in the corridor, with Oliver Vane beside her, both of them perfectly calm in the way that children are sometimes calm in emergencies, because they have not yet been told to be frightened. Oliver was looking at Iris with the expression of someone who has just met a person they have the strange feeling they should already know. Iris was looking back with the expression of someone who already knew, but was waiting for the right moment to say so. So Morwenna reached them, and she looked at her son, and she felt something so enormous that it had no name. Not grief, not relief, not joy, but all of these compacted into a single moment that was nothing but the physical reality of here he is, here he is, here he finally is. She did not say anything. She put her hand briefly on his face. Just a moment, just a touch, and then she looked at Iris. Morwenna, where is the Duchess? Iris. The fire started in her rooms. I do not think it was an accident. She found Ilara at the end of the corridor, standing at the door to her sitting room, which was filled with smoke from within. She was in her nightgown, her pale hair loose, her hands shaking. She looked, for the first time in 9 years, like a woman without armor. When she saw Morwenna, something went through her face, a complex, terrible thing, a mixture of recognition and relief, and something that might, at its very center, have been shameful. Ilara, you! Morwenna. Yes. Ilara, you came back. Morwenna. I told you I would. Ilara. I didn't know you told me that. Morwenna. I told myself. It amounts to the same thing. Smoke was thickening in the corridor. From behind the sitting room door came the sound of something falling off a shelf, perhaps, or the curtains finally catching. Morwenna, the children are safe. Come away from the door. Elara, they are not mine. Morwenna, no, they are mine. Come away from the door, Elara. Elara looked at her for a long moment. Morwenna had imagined this encounter many different ways over 8 years. She had imagined confrontation, exposure, the clean satisfaction of watching this woman understand the cost of what she had done. She had not imagined standing in a smoke-filled corridor, talking to a woman who looked hollowed out by the weight of 9 years of a stolen life, trying to persuade her to simply step back from a burning door. Hate, she was discovering, is very complicated when the object of it is standing in front of you, looking like an ordinary person who made a terrible choice and spent a decade paying for it in private. Morwenna, come away from the door. Elara took her hand. Morwenna pulled her away from the room just as the door buckled. Alaric found them in the corridor and got them out through the secondary staircase, the servants' stairs, the narrow ones, the ones that smelled of wood polish and practical work. He went first to find it clear, then came back for the children, and then for Morwenna, and last of all for his wife, who walked with the quiet compliance of someone who has stopped fighting something that has already been decided. They came out into the front drive. The east wing was still burning, but the household had contained it, and the fire had not spread to the main structure. The grand hall was intact. The staircase was intact. The marble columns stood undisturbed. Oliver stood in the drive and looked up at the house. Then he looked at Iris. Then, with the directness of a 9-year-old who has had enough of being uncertain about things, he looked at Morwenna. Oliver, she said, you are my mother. Morwenna, yes. Oliver, she also says she is my sister. Morwenna, also yes. He considered this for a moment, with the focused attention she was beginning to understand was simply how he thought. Oliver, all right. That was all he said. All right. As if the largest piece of news of his life was something he could simply file in the correct place and continue from. Elara sat on the stone steps of the front drive and said nothing and looked at nothing in particular. A physician was sent for. Alaric stood at a distance from his wife and looked at her with an expression that was not anger and was not grief, but was the particular exhaustion of a man who has just understood the full shape of the world he has been living in. He turned to Morwenna. Alaric, what happens now? Morwenna, now I own your house, your debts, your forest. Alaric, yes. Morwenna, and you have nothing. Alaric, yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Morwenna, my children need a father. He was very still. Morwenna, not a husband, not a reconciliation. I do not want those things. I built something that does not need you in it. But Oliver has grown up knowing you, and Iris should know her father, and they deserve to have both of their parents in their lives if those parents are capable of behaving like adults with a common purpose. Alaric, are you capable of that? Morwenna, I am capable of anything I decide to be capable of. The question is whether you are. 3 months later, in the early morning of a warm July day, Morwenna stood at the window of what was now her study in Hartwell Manor and looked out at the grounds. She had moved into the house in May, not for sentiment, or not only for sentiment, but because it was hers, and because it was the right size for the household she now had, and because the estate required management that would go better from the inside than from the outside. The east wing was being rebuilt. She had engaged an architect from Vienna who understood her requirements and did not ask unnecessary questions. The gambling debts had been restructured into a long-term arrangement that gave Alaric a clear path to solvency over 10 years. He was working on it, which she respected. He had taken a position with a trading company that required his practical knowledge of the county's agricultural interests, and he showed up to it every day and did not complain about it, which she also respected. The Hartwell forest she had kept. She had begun a selective timber program that employed 30 men from the local village and was projected to be profitable within 3 years. Elara was gone. Not dead, she had left London in June for the country property of a cousin in Yorkshire, and she had gone quietly, which was the most anyone could have asked of her. The legal proceedings had been complicated and had required considerable discretion, but Aldridge was very good at complicated and discreet, and had handled it with his characteristic bloodless efficiency. The matter of Oliver's birth had been resolved through private legal arrangement, rather than public exposure. Morwenna had made that choice deliberately. She could have destroyed Elara publicly. She had everything she needed to do it. But public destruction was expensive, in ways that did not show up in ledgers. It cost children their peace, it cost families their futures, and it served no purpose that the private arrangement did not serve more cleanly. She had learned something in all of this that she had not expected to learn. That revenge, when it finally arrives, is not the point. The point is what you build after. The revenge is just the clearing of the ground. Oliver had adjusted to his new life with the same methodical practicality he brought to everything. He had moved into Hartwell Manor with Morwenna and Iris in May, and within a week he and Iris had established a working arrangement that appeared, to outside observers, to have been in place for years. They argued constantly about books, and were entirely united against everyone else. They communicated in a shorthand that had apparently developed spontaneously, and that neither of them seemed to find remarkable. Oliver had asked Morwenna, in the 3rd week, if she would teach him how she had done it. Oliver: the financial part, the debt buying, how you built it from almost nothing. Morwenna: that is a very long lesson. Oliver: I have time. Morwenna: you are 9. Oliver: Iris started at 7, she told me. Morwenna had looked at him and felt something settle in her, the way a picture settles when someone adjusts it on a wall, not dramatically, but into the rightness it should have had all along. Morwenna: we begin with ledgers, and with one rule. Oliver: what rule? Morwenna: you only use what you build yourself, not what is given to you, not what you inherit, not what someone else earned. You build it. That way no one can take it from you, because a thing built by your own hands is a thing you always know how to rebuild. Alaric came on Sundays. He did not come inside at first. He came to the grounds, to the place in the East Garden, where Oliver had set up something that appeared to be an experiment involving mirrors and sunlight and angles, and he sat on a bench and watched his son work and said very little. After 2 Sundays, Oliver began explaining the experiment to him without being asked. After 3 Sundays, Alaric started asking questions. It was not a reconciliation. Morwenna had been precise about that. Not a reconciliation, not a resumption, not a repair of something that was too broken to be repaired. It was something new, a different arrangement between people who shared children, and a history, and a measure of hard-won respect, and absolutely nothing else that was guaranteed. She had discovered, somewhat to her own surprise, that this was enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, quite a lot. One evening in late July, Morwenna came down the main staircase of Hartwell Manor and found Iris and Oliver at the bottom, arguing about something astronomical, and the evening light was coming through the high windows and falling on the marble floor of the grand hall in long golden bars, and she stopped on the stairs and looked at all of it. The column on the western wall, the staircase, the hall. She had stood in this hall and been made into nothing. She was standing in it now as its owner, its occupant, the person who had built the thing, that had acquired the thing, that had allowed her to be here, not as a governess pressed against a column, crying so quietly that no one would hear, but as herself. Her full, complete, chosen self. She touched the ruby pendant at her throat. Her grandmother had given her this stone and told her, "Some things cannot be taken from you if you refuse to let them go. Your name, your worth, the truth of who you are. Hold those, and you can rebuild everything else." She had held them, through the lane in November and the ship in the Bay of Biscay, and Lisbon, and Amsterdam, and Calcutta, and all the cold, early mornings in between. She had held them. Iris looked up from the bottom of the stairs. "Iris, are you going to stand there all evening?" "Morwenna, possibly." "Oliver, we are trying to work out whether the chandelier would function as a reasonable prism in late afternoon light. We need a third set of eyes." She came down the stairs. She joined her children at the bottom, and the hall filled with their voices, and the evening light fell across the marble, and Hartwell Manor was, for the first time in a very long time, a place where something good was growing. Here is what this story leaves behind, past the drama and the reversal and the fire and the legal documents, a lesson about what it costs to reduce another person to nothing, and what that person might become if they survive it. Evangeline Crest was made into nothing on a November night in a grand hall. She was dismissed, without her name being spoken, without her truth being acknowledged, without a single consideration for the two lives growing inside her that had no part in any of it. She did not become nothing. She became the most dangerous kind of something, patient, prepared, and absolutely certain of her own worth. The lesson is not that revenge is the answer. It is rarely the answer, and she would tell you that herself. The lesson is simpler and harder than that no one can define your value without your permission. That being thrown out of a room does not mean you do not belong in it, that the difference between the person who survives that kind of cruelty and the person who is destroyed by it is not talent or luck or even intelligence. It is the decision, made alone in the cold and the dark, to keep going, one foot, then the other, into whatever comes next. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment below to tell me where you are watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story has traveled.